We are back. 2 weeks has felt like a long time, but I hope it didn't feel too long from your end. Welcome to Series 2 of Everything Scotland. 13 more episodes every Thursday starting today. If you're new here, welcome. I would strongly suggest you going back to Series 1 at some point because there is a lot in there. 13 episodes covering everything from whisky to Mary Queen of Scots, to the Tartan Army at the World Cup, and even the Highlands. If you're returning, it's good to have you back. I've missed this. Today, we're starting with something that every visitor to Scotland has a question about, and that most Scottish people have an opinion about, and that's the kilt. The history of it, the different types, controversy around its origins, and the question that I get asked on tour more than almost any other question about Scotland, which is, what is actually worn underneath? Well, I'm going to answer that question fully. You have been warned. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland, Series 2, Episode 1. Let's go. Let's start at the beginning. What is a kilt? Well, a kilt is a knee-length garment, pleated at the back and wrapped at the front, made from woven wool in a tartan pattern and worn without a waistband in the way that a skirt has one. It's associated almost exclusively with Scotland, though we will come to the Ireland question shortly. And it's one of the most recognisable national garments in the world. Guests on tour ask me two things about the kilt more than anything else. The first is, why is it called a kilt? And my answer to that, which I have been given for years and which I stand by, is because that's what happened to the last man who called it a skirt. The actual etymology is more straightforward. The word kilt comes from the Old Norse word kilter, meaning to tuck up. The original kilt was not the tailored garment that we know today. It was a large piece of woolen cloth that was gathered and belted around the body. You wore half of it as a lower garment and threw the other half over your shoulders. This is the belted plaid, or the great kilt, and we'll come back to it. The second thing guests ask, of course, is, what's underneath the kilt? And we'll get to that, I promise. But history first. The kilt as we know it today has a history that is both older and more complicated than most people assume. And it involves the Highlands, the Lowlands, an Irish weaver, a Victorian monarch, and a poet who invented more Scottish tradition than he probably should have. And we're going to cover all of it. The earliest kilts were not kilts at all in the modern sense. The garment worn by Highland men from around the 16th century, fairly more, or the great kilt, or the belted plaid. A length of heavy woven wool, typically around 5 metres long, folded and belted at the waist, with the upper portion thrown over the shoulder or wrapped around the body for warmth. It was a practical garment for the Highlands. It could be used as a bedroll at night, wrapped tightly for warmth in cold weather, and discarded quickly if you needed to move fast. It was the Swiss army knife of clothing, essentially. The smaller kilt, or the file bec, which we now call the little kilt or the walking kilt, emerged in the 18th century. And here's where the controversy begins, because the credit for its invention has been claimed by a man called Thomas Rawlinson, an English ironmaster who was working in the Highlands and apparently found his great kilt inconvenient for his workers. So he commissioned a tailor to separate the lower portion into its own garment. The Scots promptly adopted it. The English ironmaster gets the credit. This hasn't sat entirely comfortable with the Scottish national pride ever since. The next chapter involves the banning of the kilt entirely. After the Jacobite Rising of 1745, the British government passed the Dress Act of 1746, which banned Highland dress, including the kilt, as part of a broader effort to suppress Highland culture. The ban lasted until 1782, and is one of the reasons the kilt has become so politically loaded as a symbol of Scottish identity. When you suppress something, it becomes more meaningful, not less. And then there is the Victorian chapter, which we touched on in the Clans episode of Series 1, when we talked about tartan. If you want the full tartan story, go back and listen to that episode. But the short version is this. King George IV visited Scotland in 1822, orchestrated by Sir Walter Scott, and appeared in Highland dress, including a kilt and Royal Stewart tartan. Scotland went wild for it. The association between the kilt and Scottish identity was cemented in that moment and hasn't shifted since. George IV wore what most people picture when they think of the kilt today. Knee length, finely pleated at the back and made from a medium weight wool tartan with a flat apron at the front. This is the formal kilt, the one you see at weddings, at Highland Games, at ceilidhs, at graduations, the one that requires a full set of accessories to be worn properly. Sporran, ski and do, flashes, hose, gilly brogues, the full ensemble is one of the finest things a person can wear, in my view, and I say that completely without bias. Now, I do own a kilt because if you're going to spend years talking about them on a tour, you should probably wear one yourself. Mine was custom made, which is the route I would recommend to any woman thinking about wearing one, because fashion kilts tend to be made from a lighter material and the fit is never quite right. Too short, too long, nothing sits where it should. Proper kilt, made to measure, is a different thing entirely. Mine is in Kennedy weathered tartan, which is what I wear on tour, and it has survived many Scottish summers, which tells you something about the quality of a properly made wool kilt. My husband James wears the Kennedy weather tartan on tour as well, but he also has a kilt in Kennedy modern tartan for formal occasions, and so does my son. Because my son's kilt is actually James's original one, the kilt he had made for him for his 21st birthday, which he eventually outgrew and decided to pass on. James now has a shiny new Kennedy modern, and our son has his old original one. A kilt passed from father to son. I think that is one of the nicer things about a properly made kilt. It lasts long enough to mean something. When I'm on tour in my kilt, strangers comment on it constantly. I've had conversations about it on every tour. People want to know what the tartan is, what it means, whether I made it, whether it's heavy. James and I run a tour company together, so when we're guiding at the same time and we're both in matching Kennedy weather tartan, it's not unusual for strangers to stop and ask us for photographs. It happens quite regularly. We usually oblige. It's a reasonable request. And we do look quite photogenic in our matching tartan. There are more types of kilt than most people realise, and the differences between them matter if you're thinking of buying or wearing one for an occasion. So let me run through the main ones. Starting with the great kilt, which we've covered, and that's the original. 5 metres of heavy wool, wrapped and belted. You don't see many people wearing these day to day. It requires a certain commitment and a certain amount of floor space to put it on correctly. It is, however, genuinely impressive to see it worn well. Then there's the formal or the dress kilt, and this is what most people mean when they say a kilt. The knee length, sharply pleated, medium weight wool, worn with a full complement of accessories. This is the wedding kilt, the Highland Games kilt, the special occasion kilt. If you're hiring or buying a kilt for an event, this is almost certainly what you are looking for. Then there is the utility or the work kilt. And this is a more modern invention and looks quite different from the formal version. Typically, it's made from cotton or a cotton blend rather than wool, with pockets, and often in a plain colour rather than tartan. It's practical, comfortable, increasingly popular with people who want to wear a kilt day to day without the formality and expense of a wool tartan, and is perfect for tradespeople, outdoor workers, or people who simply like the freedom of movement that a kilt provides. They're functional and they have their own growing following. And that brings me on to the fashion kilt, which is where I have certain professional opinions to offer. Fashion kilts are mass produced, often made from lighter synthetic materials, frequently in the wrong length, and while they are accessible and affordable, they're not, in my view, doing the kilt any justice whatsoever. If you want a kilt, a proper one, there are options. You could save up and buy one new, or you could approach one of the many companies who offer them for hire for weddings and special events and buy some of their ex-hire stock. They're always still in great condition, and there's a good chance you'll find one that fits you like a glove. And the difference is significant. A well-made wool kilt will outlast you if you look after it. And finally, the pipe band kilt deserves a mention because it looks different from the civilian version in ways that people don't always notice. Pipe band kilts are typically longer and made from heavier material to swing properly when marching. The pleating is different too. The whole garment is designed for movement and visibility from a distance. It's a performance kilt as much as a dress kilt, and it's a thing of real beauty when a full pipe band is in motion. Now, those of you paying attention might have noticed that I mentioned there's a wee bit of controversy around the kilt and its origins. That's because there are some disputes between Scotland and Ireland over where it originated. And I'd be doing this episode a disservice if I didn't acknowledge that. Because it's the kind of thing that people feel strongly about and the kind of thing that gets interesting when you look into it properly. Ireland does have its own kilt tradition, primarily associated with Irish nationalism and the cultural revival movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Irish kilt is typically a solid colour rather than tartan. Saffron yellow is the most traditional, and it has its own distinct history and meaning within Irish culture. Irish pipe bands wear kilts. Irish dancing tradition has its own relationship with the kilt. This is real, and it's not something that should be dismissed. The argument about which country invented the kilt is, frankly, probably unanswerable at this point. Both sides have their evidence and their historians and their passionate advocates. What I will say is this: the kilt is a global cultural symbol. The garment the world associates with Celtic heritage and national identity is primarily associated with Scotland. The tartan kilt, the Highland dress, the full formal ensemble with sporran and ski and do. That's the Scottish way, and it's been understood internationally for 200 years. Whether that's entirely fair to Ireland is a completely separate question, but I'm a Scottish tour guide, so I'll let you draw your own conclusions about where my sympathies lie. Now, I did promise at the start of this episode that I would answer the biggest question of them all, and that is, what's underneath? Well, here it is. Traditionally, nothing is worn beneath the kilt, and that's the correct answer, and it is the one most Scottish men will give you. The tradition has a military origin. Highland soldiers wore nothing beneath their kilts in battle, and the practice carried through into civilian life. A true Scotsman, as the saying goes, wears nothing under his kilt. The kilt is the thing. The kilt is sufficient. Now, in practice, in 2025, particularly at formal events where the kilt is hired rather than owned and has been worn by an unknown number of previous wearers. Some people make alternative choices. This is understandable, and we won't judge. Guests ask me about this all of the time on tour. Some even ask me before they've had a chance to say hello, because they've been wondering about it all morning and just can't help themselves. And my answer is always the same. I refer them to my husband. James, when asked what he wears under his kilt, will answer without missing a beat. 2 shades of lipstick on a good day, and he's been saying it for years. It lands every time. I've watched it land on guests from 12 different countries. The delivery is impeccable. He's a professional magician and a man who understands timing, and that answer is perfectly timed every single time. As for me, well, I'm a lady, and I'm well covered. And that's about as much detail as you're getting on that particular subject. There's a number of things that people believe about kilts that are not quite accurate. And as someone who spends quite a significant part of our professional life answering questions about them, I want to take a wee minute to address the main ones that come up. First, every Scottish person wears a kilt all the time. No, they don't. Most Scottish people will wear a kilt on a specific occasion. Weddings, formal events, Highland Games, Burns Night. But day to day, the kilt is no more common on the streets of Glasgow or Edinburgh than a 3-piece suit. I wear mine on tour because it's part of what I do and who I am as a guide. Most of my fellow Scots, they just wear jeans. Next, all kilts look the same. No, they absolutely do not, as we've just covered. The difference between a great kilt and a modern dress kilt and a utility kilt is significant. And within the dress kilt category, the differences in quality between properly made wool and fashion kilts are immediately apparent to anyone who has seen both. Next, you need to have Scottish ancestry to wear a kilt. Again, no, you don't. The kilt is not ethnically restricted. Anybody can wear it. There are many tartans that were created specifically for universal wear. Black Watch, for example, or Flower of Scotland, or the various national tartans created for countries that wanted to participate in the tartan tradition. If you want to wear a kilt, you don't have to have any Scottish ancestry whatsoever. You're entirely welcome to do so. Scotland, we're just glad to have you. Next, the kilt must be uncomfortable. Well, no. A well-made kilt, correctly fitted, is one of the most comfortable garments you can wear. It's breathable, it allows freedom of movement, and the weight of a good kilt keeps it sitting exactly where it should. The discomfort people associate with kilts usually comes from ill-fitting fashion kilts, or from the full formal accessories, which do take a wee bit of time to get used to. The kilt itself is not the problem. So now we've cleared all of that up, and before we finish, I'm just going to run through the 5 questions I get asked about kilts more than any others. These are the ones that come up on nearly every tour in every city from guests from every country without fail. So here are my answers, final, once and for all. Number 1, what is the difference between a kilt and a skirt? And my answer to this, which I give with a completely straight face, is because that's what happened to the last man that called it a skirt. In a Scottish accent, kilt and killed sound close enough for the joke to work, and I've been making it for many years, and it usually lands pretty well. Beyond the joke, kilt is a structured pleated garment made from heavy wool tartan, worn with a specific set of accessories and with its own centuries of cultural significance. A skirt is a skirt. They're not the same thing. Please don't call it a skirt. Number 2. What do Scotsmen really wear under their kilts? Traditionally, nothing. That is the correct answer, and most Scottish men will give it to you without hesitation. As I've said, my husband has his own specific way of answering, which you would have heard earlier. I've watched his answer land on guests from all over the world, and it's never once failed to raise a giggle. As for my own answer, well, as I say, I'm a lady, and I'm giving nothing away. Number 3. Do women traditionally wear kilts? No, traditionally they don't. The kilt is historically a male garment. Women in Highland dress would traditionally have worn an araced, a long draped garment made from belted tartan cloth. Essentially, a female equivalent of the great kilt. More commonly today, women wear tartan in the form of maybe a sash over a formal dress, which is beautiful, an entirely traditional way to incorporate tartan into a formal Highland dress without wearing a kilt itself. I wear a kilt because I had one custom made for touring, and because I'm a professional who's going to talk about kilts in Scotland all day long, and I think it's nice to be wearing the thing you're talking about, but it's not a traditional female garment, and it's worth knowing that. 4. Are kilts worn every day in Scotland? As I said earlier, no they're not. And I know that might be disappointing to some of you, but the streets of Glasgow are not awash with men in full Highland dress, going about their daily business. Most Scottish people will wear jeans or trousers. I wear my kilt because it's kind of part of my uniform. Beyond that, a kilt outfit is the Scottish equivalent of a black tie or dinner suit, reserved for special occasions. The occasions where it appears are usually significant, and that's what gives it part of its weight. If everyone wore it to the supermarket, it would mean something different, and it doesn't need to mean anything different at all. 5. Finally, can I wear a kilt even if I'm not Scottish? Will I offend anybody? And the answer is yes, you absolutely can wear a kilt, and no, nobody is going to be offended. Scotland's not precious about this. If you want to wear a kilt, wear a kilt. Even if you have no Scottish ancestry whatsoever, we don't really care. If you want to have something made in a tartan associated with a particular Scottish clan or region, most kilt makers are delighted to help you choose. Scotland's just glad you want to wear it. The only thing I would ask is that when you buy one, buy a proper one. Not one of the cheap fashion ones from the internet. Proper well-made woolen one from a real Scottish kilt maker. If you're going to do it properly. I promise you won't regret it. So now we've cleared all that up and I've hopefully answered any of the burning questions about the kilt you might have, I'm going to move on to my listener stories. I asked at the end of episode 13 of series 1 for your suggestions and topics and stories, and you delivered, so thank you. Keep them coming. My first story is from Beth in Tennessee, and she said, I listened to your Mary Queen of Scots episode on a long flight to London. By the time we landed, I wanted to reroute my trip entirely to visit Linlithgow Palace in Stirling. My travel companion thought I had lost my mind when I was trying to work out if we could somehow squeeze in a flight from London to Edinburgh and go and visit some of the places you spoke about. Didn't entirely work out as planned, but who knows, maybe next time. Who knows, Beth, maybe next time you'll make it up to Scotland instead of just London. Let us know how that goes for you. And now we've got one from Gary in California. Gary said, I've been listening since the beginning. I live alone and I like to put podcasts on in the evening, and I stumbled across yours. It's good company. Scotland sounds like somewhere I would feel right at home, even though I've never been. I've started saving up. I just want you to know that someone out there is saving up to go to Scotland because of this podcast. Gary, that's one of the nicest things anybody has sent in, and I'm sure Scotland will be ready when you get here. So will I. Come and say hello. I'm going to wrap up now with our Scots word of the week. And this week, it's Yaldi. Y-A-L-D-I. Yaldi. An exclamation of pure delight. The moment when something just goes brilliantly right and you cannot help yourself but celebrate. Yes, get in. That'll do nicely. Yaldi. It's energetic and joyful and completely Scottish. And if you have ever watched a Scottish football fan at the moment the goal goes in, you'll have seen Yaldi's in its purest form. We're back for Series 2, 13 new episodes, giving it Yaldi. Next week on Everything Scotland, we're going to talk about Scottish inventors and innovation. We are, after all, the country that gave the world the telephone, the television, penicillin, tarmac, the flushing toilet, and a great many other things that have quietly shaped modern life while Scotland got on with other things. That's next Thursday. In the meantime, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a review if you haven't already, and find us at Everything Scotland Official on social media. And if this is your first time listening, go back to Series 1 and see what you've missed. And of course, keep sending me in your stories, your questions and your suggestions for what you'd like to hear more of. I love reading everything. I'm Lesley Kennedy. This is Everything Scotland. Slán